If you love Brides of Bliss County series by Linda Lale Miller, you will love this historical Western romance audiobook's full-length novel. The Brides of Willow County, Book 1, The Pact, by Shelfie Bennett. Chapter 1. Maggie Harlow gazed out the window of Bella's coffee house, her thoughts 1,000 miles from the familiar streets of Willow Creek. The morning sunlight poured through the lace curtains, painting the room in soft golden hues. She cradled a steaming cup of coffee between her hands, the rich, comforting aroma rising toward her. Outside, the sleepy main street was still and quiet, with only the occasional whistle of a train in the distance to disturb the peace. The bell above the door chimed, and Sophie Delaney swept in, her long scarf trailing behind her like a banner. Her cheeks were flushed, the color bright against her golden complexion, and she grinned as she caught sight of Maggie. "Mornin', Maggie," she said, pulling off her gloves and plopping down in the chair across from her friend. "Didn't think I'd make it. My horse threw a shoe halfway into town." Maggie offered a small smile. "You always find a way, Sophie." Before Sophie could reply, Elise Grant entered, carefully balancing a tray of muffins from her bakery. Her dark hair was pulled back with a simple clip, and a streak of flour still dusted her cheekbone. She set the tray down with a relieved sigh and brushed. "Sorry I'm late," Elise said, her voice steady. "The bread took longer than I expected this morning. That new oven's got a mind of its own." Maggie gestured to the empty chairs around the table, the corners of her mouth lifting ever so slightly. "Don't apologize, Elise. You're right on time." Sophie reached for a muffin, breaking it open and releasing a waft of warm cinnamon and sugar. "It's about time we all got together again. What's it been, 2 weeks?" "Closer to 3, Elise corrected gently, folding her hands in her lap. Her steady gaze shifted to Maggie. "You were the one who wanted to meet this morning. What's on your mind?" Maggie took a slow sip of her coffee, searching for the right words. It had been weeks since she'd been able to corral both her friends in one place, and the idea she'd been turning over in her mind for months was finally ready to come out. She placed her cup back down, the delicate clink of porcelain breaking the stillness. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice measured, "that the three of us have spent so much time supporting everyone else. Our families, our neighbors. But when's the last time we did something for ourselves?" Sophie tilted her head, a curious smile playing on her lips. "Go on." Maggie leaned forward slightly, her hazel eyes gleaming with determination. "What if we made a promise, right here, right now, a pact? By the end of this year, each of us will take a real step towards something we've always wanted, something we've put off for too long." Elise's brows knit together. "You mean like setting a goal?" "Exactly," Maggie said, her tone firm but encouraging. "For me, it's finally turning that old barn into a proper event venue. I've talked about it for years. It's time to actually do it." Sophie toyed with the scarf draped over her shoulder. "I've been wanting to turn my flower arrangements into a proper business, but quitting my job at the Mercantile, that's a big leap." Maggie nodded, understanding in her eyes. "It's a leap worth taking, Sophie, and you won't be doing it alone. That's the whole point of this pact. We'll be here for each other every step of the way." Elise hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "I don't even know where to start. Between the bakery and my daughter, there's no time to think about what I want." Sophie reached across the table, placing a hand over Elise's. "What do you want, Elise? If you could do anything, no matter how big or small, what would it be?" Elise was silent for a moment. Then she exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "I want to find a way to love again. Not just for myself, but for my daughter. I want her to see that it's possible to move on and find happiness even after everything we've been through." The three women sat in thoughtful silence. Then Maggie raised her cup. "So it's settled. By the end of this year, we each take our leap, and we'll hold each other to it." Sophie grinned, lifting her coffee in agreement. "Deal." Elise hesitated only a moment before joining the others, a faint smile on her lips. "Deal." As their cups clinked together, the warm sun continued to shine through the lace curtains, and the sleepy main street of Willow Creek seemed just a little more alive. Maggie leaned back in her chair, letting the warmth of her coffee cup seep into her palms. Across the table, Sophie tossed her scarf onto an empty seat and wrapped her hands around her own mug, shaking her head. "I tell you, every morning it's the same," Sophie began, her voice carrying the crisp edge of frustration. "I get to the mercantile before the sun's up, spend the whole day stocking shelves and answering Mrs. Crandall's questions about thread colors, and by the time I get home, I don't even have the energy to look at my own work. I used to love putting together arrangements, painting. Now it's all just waiting in a corner, collecting dust." Maggie nodded slowly, her hazel eyes fixed on Sophie with understanding. "It's not just you. I've been up to my neck in other people's weddings for years, planning, organizing, making their dreams come true while mine stay shelved. I keep telling myself I'll fix up that barn next month, then next year, but it's always something else coming first." Elise sat quietly, her gaze dropping to the tray of muffins she'd set between them. Her usually steady hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual, tinged with an honesty that caught them both off guard. "I don't even know what my dreams are anymore," she said. Later, the divorce, it was all about keeping the bakery afloat, making sure Emma was taken care of. "I've spent so much time worrying about surviving, I've forgotten how to imagine something better." The words hung between them, soft but weighty, like the low clouds over Willow Creek that morning. Maggie felt her throat tighten, not with pity, but with a sharp sense of solidarity. She'd known Elise as a steady hand, the one who never wavered no matter what life threw at her. Hearing this, admitting to dreams left behind, made Maggie feel less alone in her own frustrations. "Well, maybe it's time we stopped letting things sit on the shelf," Maggie said, her voice steady but gentle. She glanced at Sophie, then Elise, before setting her cup down. "What if we promised each other, here and now, that we'd find a way to make those dreams happen? No excuses, no more putting it off, just a pact. By the end of the year, we all take one real step forward." Sophie blinked, her frustration softening into thoughtfulness. Elise hesitated, then gave the smallest of nods. They didn't say anything just yet, but Maggie could see something shifting behind their eyes. It was the start of something, fragile but hopeful, like the first green shoots pushing through frost. The conversation wound down to a comfortable hum, the air between them settling as it often did when all three friends sat together. Maggie let her gaze linger on Sophie and Elise. For the first time in months, a spark of determination flickered inside her. "You know," Maggie said, leaning forward, "what if we set a goal, something concrete, something we can all work toward?" Sophie quirked an eyebrow, her lips curving into a playful smile. "What, like a blood oath?" Elise chuckled softly, a sound Maggie hadn't heard in far too long. It was like a melody she'd nearly forgotten, and hearing it now made her grin. "I don't think we need to go that far," Elise said, a lightness creeping back into her voice. "But I'll admit, having something to focus on sounds refreshing." Maggie nodded, her smile growing. "No blood oaths, just a promise to ourselves and to each other. By the end of the year, we each take one big step toward what we really want. No excuses, no putting it off anymore." Sophie tapped her mug thoughtfully, then raised it toward Maggie. "All right, Harlow, you've got yourself a deal." Maggie looked to Elise, whose dark eyes held a flicker of uncertainty. For a moment, Elise hesitated, but then she straightened, that quiet strength she always carried shining through. "Deal," she said, lifting her own cup. Maggie picked up her coffee and raised it. "To our pact," she said, her voice steady with resolve. "No more holding back." Their mugs clinked together, a small but solid sound in the cozy cafe. For the first time in weeks, Maggie felt like she could breathe again. The future stretched ahead of them. Still uncertain, still filled with challenges, but now there was purpose. There was a promise. And just like that, the three of them were bound. Not by blood, but by a shared commitment to see one another through. Chapter 2. Maggie guided her buckboard wagon down the uneven dirt road, her pulse quickening as the old barn came into view. The structure stood alone at the edge of a grassy meadow, its weathered wooden boards gray with age and its roof patched with sheets of rusting tin. A small herd of crows took flight from the sagging door, their caws echoing against the broad Montana sky. Pulling the reins, she brought the horses to a halt in the gravel-strewn driveway. Maggie sat there for a moment, taking it all in. The barn was still solid despite the years. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls, casting narrow beams of gold onto the packed dirt floor. The scent of hay and weathered wood lingered faintly in the air. It wasn't much to look at now, but Maggie didn't see it for what it was. She saw it for what it could be. In her mind, the slanted roof was a charming feature, not a flaw. The rough-hewn beams overhead were perfect for stringing lanterns and garlands. She could picture sturdy wooden tables adorned with lace runners and wildflower arrangements. She imagined a wide, open space for dancing, laughter, and celebration. It was almost as if the barn had been waiting all these years for someone to breathe life back into it. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Stepping inside, Maggie ran her fingers along one of the support beams. The wood was cool and smooth under her touch, and she felt the faint vibration of potential. Sure, it needed work. New boards here and there, a coat of whitewash, a proper roof, but the bones were good, solid, sturdy, just like her. Her lips curved into a small, determined smile. This place was more than a barn. It was a promise to herself. A fresh start. A chance to turn a long-held dream into something tangible. Maggie placed her hands on her hips and let the vision take shape in her mind's eye. If she listened closely, she could almost hear the future echoes of a fiddle tune floating through the air, and the delighted laughter of people dancing in the warm glow of lantern light. Yes, this barn could become something truly beautiful. She just had to make it happen. Maggie pushed open the creaking barn doors, her boots kicking up tiny clouds of dust. As she stepped inside, sunlight poured in through the cracks in the walls, illuminating the wide expanse of the floor and the rough-hewn beams overhead. She pulled her sketchbook from her satchel, brushing off the cover before flipping it open to a clean page. Starting with a quick pencil stroke, she marked where the tables could go. Long, sturdy surfaces made from reclaimed wood, their edges smoothed by time. She imagined flowers cascading over a makeshift altar at the far end of the barn, sunlight filtering through old panes of glass to create a halo of natural light. Her pencil flew across the paper, her vision blooming with every line. Maggie moved to the center of the barn, her boots echoing on the planks. Here she could set the dance floor, she thought. The idea of couples spinning under lanterns strung from the beams brought a smile to her lips. She paused to jot down a note. Fairy lights, lanterns, test spacing. But as her gaze swept upward, she noticed a dark, splintered crack running through one of the support beams. Her heart sank. Stepping closer, she ran her hand along the wood. It was dry and crumbling under her fingertips. Farther along, a roof panel sagged precariously, allowing a slant of sunlight to spotlight the aging structure. Her pencil hesitated on the page. For a moment, doubt crept in, clouding the vivid picture she'd been sketching. This place would take more than paint and decorations. It would need real work, hard, back-breaking work, and money. She turned slowly, taking in the barn's quiet grandeur one more time. Then she straightened her shoulders. No dream worth having came easy, she thought. She just needed a plan. With a deep breath, she tucked the sketchbook back into her satchel and patted it for good measure. This barn wasn't perfect yet, but it would be. It had to be. Maggie was crouched near the barn's sagging door, running her fingers along a line of wood she imagined could one day hold a set of sturdy iron hinges, when the sound of boots crunching on gravel reached her ears. Straightening, she turned to see a weathered figure approaching from the direction of the main road. The man was tall, with a wiry frame and the kind of leathery complexion that came from years under the Montana sun. His hat was tipped low over gray-streaked hair, and his heavy coat hung loose around shoulders that carried more than their share of work. He stopped a few yards away, a glance at her hands still dusty from inspecting the barn, before his pale blue eyes lifted to her face. "You Maggie Harlow?" he asked, his voice rough, as if unused to pleasantries. "I am," she answered, her tone calm and steady. "You must be Mr. Tully." The older man grunted in confirmation, shoving his hands into the pockets of his coat. "You've got an idea in your head about turning this old barn into something?" "I do," she said, meeting his skeptical gaze without hesitation. "A wedding and event venue, if you'll agree to lease the property." Tully tilted his head, studying her the way a rancher might size up a new horse. "Can't say I see how you're gonna pull it off. This place ain't been more'n a hay shed for years. You'll be sinking money into repairs before you see a single dollar back." Maggie pressed her lips together briefly, then nodded. "I understand it's a risk, but I've spent enough years waiting for the perfect conditions. Now's the time to start." Tully stepped closer, motioning for her to follow. Together they walked along the perimeter, boots crunching on the frosty ground as he pointed out the property lines. An old fence, half hidden under prairie grass, a stand of cottonwoods marking the boundary to the north, and a dried-up creek bed that cut through the western edge. "This land ain't done much for me in a long while," Tully admitted gruffly. "But I ain't just handing it over on a whim." He stopped and turned to face her, his weathered face unreadable. "You'll need to prove you can keep up with the payments, even on a lease-to-own deal." Maggie squared her shoulders. "I'm not asking for a handout, Mr. Tully, just a fair chance. I've worked hard all my life. I can take on a bit more, if it means building something I believe in." For a long moment, Tully just stared at her. Then, with a slight nod, he reached into his coat pocket and produced a set of keys. "You get your paperwork straight with the lawyer, we'll call it a deal. But don't say I didn't warn you. This place'll give you a run for your money." Maggie accepted the keys, their cold weight in her hand feeling like a bridge between the dream she'd been nurturing and the reality she was stepping into. "I appreciate the warning," she said, tucking them safely into her pocket. "But I'll make it work." As Tully headed back to his truck, Maggie turned to face the barn once more. The first step was taken, the keys in her pocket proof that the path she'd chosen was real. Excitement bubbled in her chest, mingling with the nerves that always came when standing on the edge of something new. She'd made the first move, and now there was no turning back. Maggie perched on the edge of her chair, gripping her neatly bound proposal as Mr. Reynolds, the town's bank manager, leafed through its pages. His office was stiff and formal, plain wooden furniture, a single landscape painting on the wall, and a faint smell of ink and ledgers. "No warmth here," Maggie thought. No encouragement, only the cold scrutiny of numbers and feasibility studies. She'd dressed as smartly as she could manage, borrowing a blazer from Sophie and smoothing her hair until it gleamed. The binder she'd compiled was as detailed as any banker could want, filled with maps of the property, calculations of anticipated revenue from events, and a meticulous timeline for renovations. She had done her homework. "This is quite ambitious," Reynolds said at last, his round face unreadable as he adjusted his glasses. "It's more than ambition," Maggie replied, willing her voice to stay steady. "It's a real opportunity. Willow Creek doesn't have a dedicated event venue. The closest option is 20 miles away, and it's more lodge than barn. This would be a place for families, for weddings and reunions. Something charming, affordable, and close to home." Reynolds frowned, tapping a finger on the edge of the binder. "What about zoning permits? You'll need approval from the town council, and your revenue projections. These are optimistic." Maggie nodded, hiding the anxiety bubbling in her chest. "I've already started the process with the council. As for the numbers, I've based them on what similar venues in the region are earning, adjusted for the size of Willow Creek. If we can attract just a portion of that business, the loan will be repaid within 5 years. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "And the repairs? Have you gotten firm estimates on the cost of materials and labor?" "Yes, sir," Maggie said, opening the binder to the appropriate page. "I've included itemized quotes from local carpenters, roofers, and electricians. It's all here." He nodded slowly, flipping through the documents again. Maggie felt the sweat gathering on her palms, but she kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture composed. Every answer was prepared, every figure double-checked. This was her dream, and she was ready to defend it. Finally, Reynolds closed the binder and folded his hands on the desk. "I'll need to review this more thoroughly. Come back next week, and I'll let you know if we can move forward." Maggie bit back the impulse to press for more. Instead, she smiled politely and nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I'll see you next week." She stood, tucking the binder under her arm, and turned toward the door. As she stepped into the hallway, the sound of the bank's clock chiming the hour seemed unnaturally loud. When she caught her reflection in the glass doors on her way out, she looked calm, professional, even confident, but inside, her mind whirled with doubts. If this loan didn't go through, she would have to find another way. She couldn't let the barn, her dream, slip away now. Outside, she lifted her chin against the brisk wind and tightened her grip on the binder. This wasn't over. She'd return next week with every additional piece of information Mr. Reynolds. Chapter 3. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mingling with the faint clatter of typewriter keys in the background. Sophie sat hunched at her desk, staring at the letter on the screen in front of her. The words she'd typed were polite, measured, and entirely non-negotiable. Her heart pounded in her chest as she read them again. It wasn't just a resignation letter. It was a declaration, a promise to herself. In the cramped cubicle, every sound felt amplified. The faint aroma of stale coffee drifted through the air, mingling with the musty scent of paper files that had long outlived their usefulness. Sophie flexed her fingers, trying to shake off the tension. She knew it was time. She had known it for months now. Yet her hand hovered over the keyboard, hesitant to press the print command. "Radio?" A sharp voice snapped her out of her thoughts. Her supervisor appeared at the edge of the cubicle, a stack of folders balanced precariously in one hand. Without so much as a glance, he dropped them onto her desk. "We need these sorted and filed by the end of the day. Thanks." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her sitting in the dimly lit cubicle surrounded by the clutter of other people's tasks and priorities. Frustration bubbled up inside her, hot and unrelenting. She turned back to the screen, took a deep breath and hit print. The machine whirred and clicked, spitting out the paper as though it too were relieved to be rid of her. Sophie grabbed the letter and strode through the maze of partitions toward human resources. The office was just as dull as the rest of the building. Gray carpet, beige walls, and a single pot of wilting ferns. She handed the paper to the administrator, who barely glanced at it before nodding. "Good luck," the woman said, more out of routine than sincerity. But Sophie didn't care. The weight that had pressed down on her chest for so long began to lift. She could breathe again. Back home that evening, Sophie pulled a stack of floral sketches from a trunk at the foot of her bed. She carried them, along with a set of easels, into the spare room she'd turned into a makeshift studio. The space wasn't much. A small desk pushed against the wall, a simple stool, and a window that let in the last golden rays of the setting sun. She opened the window to let in the crisp Montana air and began arranging her brushes, paints, and papers. Her heart still raced, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from possibility. As she set out her tools and placed a fresh canvas on the easel, she imagined what she could create. The room filled with the faint scent of oils and the soft rustle of paper. Sophie stared at the blank canvas, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface. The fear lingered, whispering that she was taking a risk too great. But beneath it, excitement swelled, buoying her, whispering that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The gallery buzzed with soft conversation, the low murmur of voices blending with the occasional clink of wine glasses. Warm lights spilled from chandeliers, glinting off the polished hardwood floors. Sophie stood quietly in a corner, a tray of hors d'oeuvres balanced on a nearby pedestal. Around her, the walls were adorned with her work, lush, vibrant paintings of wildflowers, the vivid colors jumping out against the crisp white of the gallery's walls. She smoothed her hands over her skirt, resisting the urge to fidget. Her friends arrived together. Maggie, dressed in a tasteful but practical dress, offered a broad smile the moment she stepped inside. Elise followed, carrying a small basket of her bakery's signature lemon scones as a congratulatory gift. Their presence immediately steadied Sophie. Maggie's enthusiasm was infectious as she moved from painting to painting, pointing out her favorites and urging others to do the same. For a moment, Sophie felt that buoyant confidence she'd imagined when she first dreamed of showing her work. But as the hours passed, the excitement began to wane. One by one, the guests drifted out, leaving behind only a scattering of well-meaning compliments and a small number of sold pieces. The gallery owner, a refined woman with carefully pinned hair and a discerning eye, approached Sophie near the end of the evening. "Well done," she said, her tone polite but non-committal. "I'll let you know if there's interest in the unsold works." Then she moved on, not unkindly, but without the encouragement Sophie had hoped for. As the last of the guests departed, Sophie collected her things in silence, her earlier optimism fading. Maggie and Elise offered kind words before leaving her to close up. Alone in the now empty gallery, Sophie looked at her paintings still hanging on the walls and felt the first tremors of doubt. Was she truly good enough to make this work? Or had she been fooling herself all along? That night, Sophie lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The excitement of taking the leap, of showing her art to the world, now seemed far away. Self-doubt gnawed at her, dragging her into a cycle of what-ifs. Her dream felt more fragile than ever, and she wondered if it would crumble under the weight of her own expectations. The next morning, a soft knock at the door roused her from a fitful sleep. She opened it to find Maggie, smiling and holding a brown paper bag that gave off the unmistakable scent of freshly baked goods. "Thought you might need a little pick-me-up," Maggie said as she stepped inside, setting the bag on Sophie's kitchen table. They sat together, sipping coffee and nibbling on Elise's pastries. Maggie listened patiently as Sophie voiced her fears, her uncertainties about whether she'd made the right choice in leaving the security of her old life. "You can't judge your success by one night, Sophie," Maggie said firmly. "Look at what you've accomplished already. You've shown your work. You've made sales. That's no small thing." Sophie shook her head. "But what if it's not enough? What if I've made a mistake?" Maggie reached across the table, covering Sophie's hand with her own. "We all feel that way sometimes, but you've got something real here, something beautiful, and you're not doing this alone. What do you say we work together? I need floral arrangements for my barn, and your work is exactly what I've been looking for. This way, you're creating something steady for the venue while still following your dream." Sophie looked at her friend, seeing not just encouragement but a genuine belief in her abilities. The knot in her chest began to loosen. Maybe she wasn't as alone in this as she'd thought. As they sipped their coffee and talked through ideas, Sophie felt a new flicker of hope. With her friends by her side, maybe she could make her dream a reality after all. Chapter 4. The sun was barely up, and already the bakery was filled with the comforting aroma of fresh bread and sugar-glazed pastries. Elise stood behind the counter, sliding a tray of cinnamon rolls onto the glass display. The golden brown spirals glistened with a drizzle of icing, still warm enough to send curls of steam up into the cool morning air. She tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear and adjusted her apron, her thoughts drifting to the list of orders she needed to fill before noon. The bell over the door jingled, and a gust of crisp Montana air followed Alex Martinez as he stepped inside. Tall and broad-shouldered, Alex carried himself with an easy confidence that instantly filled the room. His work-worn boots left faint impressions on the wooden floor, and a warm smile lit up his face as he approached the counter. "Mornin', Elise," he said, his voice smooth as molasses. "Smells like heaven in here as always." Elise glanced up from the tray, momentarily caught off guard by the genuine warmth in his tone. "Good morning, Alex. Just out for your usual?" He grinned, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'll take a black coffee and one of those scones that look like they came straight out of my grandmother's kitchen." He paused, inhaling deeply. "And maybe a cinnamon roll, too. The smell's just too good to resist." Her laugh escaped before she could stop it, a light, musical sound that made her feel momentarily free of the worries she carried. "You're going to spoil your breakfast. Best way to start the day," Alex said, his grin widening. "If I could wake up to that smell every morning, I'd count myself a lucky man." Elise blushed faintly, but turned to fill his order, grateful for the excuse to look away for a moment. When she handed him the coffee and baked goods, their fingers brushed briefly, and a faint spark of warmth flickered in her chest. She told herself it was just the heat of the oven. Over the next few weeks, Alex became a fixture in the bakery. He stopped by almost every morning, sometimes on his way to the blacksmith's forge where he did part-time work, other times just to chat while sipping his coffee. Elise quickly learned that he wasn't just a friendly face. He had a knack for remembering the little things. He knew her daughter Emma's favorite type of cookie and would bring an extra one home to her on occasion. He commented on the music Elise played softly in the background, old fiddle tunes she'd loved since she was a child, and even complimented the cheerful red curtains she'd hung up in the window. Each visit seemed to chip away at Elise's careful defenses. She couldn't deny the warmth she felt whenever Alex walked in, or how her morning seemed brighter once he left. At the same time, a quiet voice inside her reminded her that she'd been down this road before. After her husband left, she'd promised herself she wouldn't risk her heart so easily again. One evening, just as she was closing up, Alex lingered at the counter. The bakery was quiet now, the air still heavy with the scent of flour and sugar. "Listen, Elise," Alex began, his hat in hand. "I was wondering if maybe you'd like to have dinner with me sometime. Nothing fancy, just a chance to talk without a counter between us." She froze, her hands still dusted with flour. The question was simple, but the answer felt far more complicated. Her mind raced through excuses. She had her daughter to think about, the bakery to run. But Alex's steady gaze and patient smile made her hesitate. She started, then paused. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she hated that she felt so unprepared. "I'm not sure." "That's okay," Alex said, his voice as calm and easy as ever. "Take your time." That night, Emma noticed her mother's distraction as they prepared dinner. Elise finally sat down with her, explaining the situation in simple terms. To her surprise, Emma smiled and said, "You should go, Mama. You deserve to have fun." Her daughter's quiet encouragement lingered in Elise's mind. By the next morning, when Alex returned for his usual order, she nodded shyly and said, "How about Friday evening?" Alex's face lit up, and his smile carried her through the rest of the day. For the first time in years, Elise felt the stirring of something she thought she'd lost. Hope. Elise stood in the doorway of the bakery, her shawl draped over one arm and a small basket of biscuits in the other. The golden glow of the setting sun bathed the town in soft light. She was ready for a pleasant evening, looking forward to good conversation and a chance to relax. Just as she stepped outside, a shadow crossed her path. "Hello, Elise." The voice stopped her cold. It was quiet, tentative, but unmistakable. Her gaze snapped to the figure standing a few paces away. Trevor. His hat was clutched in his hands, his once boyish face weathered by years that hadn't been kind. There was a flicker of something familiar in his blue eyes. Regret, maybe? Or guilt? But it was swallowed by the surge of old, raw memories. The sharp ache of betrayal. The long nights of holding her daughter and wondering how she'd manage alone. The mix of relief and bitterness when the divorce papers finally arrived. "What are you doing here, Trevor?" Elise's voice was steadier than she felt. She clutched the basket tighter, willing herself to remain calm. "I heard you were doing well," he said, taking a small step closer. I thought I might come by and see for myself. I didn't mean to surprise you, but I had to tell you. Elise, I'm sorry for everything." The words hung between them, heavier than the cool evening air. He hesitated, glancing toward the bakery as though its familiar facade might lend him strength. "I know I made mistakes, big ones. I wanted to see if there's any way for what?" Elise cut him off, her voice sharper now. "For us to pick up where we left off. You left, Trevor. You made your choices, and I made mine. I have a life here, a good life." Trevor looked down at his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I know I don't deserve another chance, Elise, but I miss you. I miss our family." Something cracked inside her at the word family. There had been a time when that word meant everything to her. A time when she'd thought they could weather anything, but that time was long gone, washed away by years of struggle and growth. Her daughter was happy now, thriving, and so was Elise. She'd built something new from the ground up. Her hands trembled as she stepped back into the doorway. "I can't do this now, Trevor. I have somewhere I need to be." He started to speak again, but she shook her head and turned away. The warmth that had been building in her chest all afternoon, the anticipation of dinner with Alex, had turned cold and uncertain. By the time she locked the bakery door and sat down at the counter, her appetite for the evening was gone. Hours later, Maggie and Sophie arrived, their concerned expressions filling the cozy kitchen. Elise had confided in them before, but this was different. Seeing Trevor again had opened wounds she thought were healed. "I'm so angry at myself," Elise admitted, staring at the mug of tea in her hands. "I was finally moving on, and now he shows up, and I don't know what to do." Maggie rested a hand on Elise's arm. "You were allowed to feel upset. He turned up out of the blue and dredged up a lot of pain. But you've come so far, Elise. You deserve to keep moving forward." "And you don't owe him anything," Sophie added firmly. "Not your time, not your forgiveness. You've built something beautiful here, a life, a home. Don't let him shake that." Their words settled in Elise's heart like a steadying hand. She realized that Trevor's return didn't mean she had to backtrack. It didn't mean she owed him a second chance. She had the power to choose her path. The next day, she asked Trevor to meet her at the bakery before it opened. Standing across from him in the quiet, flower-dusted space, she looked him straight in the eye. Liwian rang her. "I'm glad you've had time to think about the past, Trevor, but I'm not going back. My life is here in Willow Creek, with my daughter, with my friends. I wish you well, but I'm not interested in revisiting our marriage. We both deserve to move on." Trevor opened his mouth, but whatever words he had caught in his throat, he nodded once. Elise closed her eyes and exhaled deeply. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. She'd made her choice, her own choice. And that strength stayed with her as the morning sunlight began to filter through the bakery's windows. Chapter 5. The barn stood silent under a clear Montana night, the stars casting faint silver light across the wide open field. Inside, Maggie had just placed the last centerpiece on a sturdy pine table when she noticed the unmistakable glimmer of water pooling beneath her feet. She froze. For a moment, she thought it was her imagination, but the cool touch of dampness soaking through her boots said otherwise. Heart pounding, she turned to see the source. A burst pipe near the back wall, water trickling down the boards and spreading across the newly cleaned floor. The rugs she'd painstakingly laid out were already sodden, their colors bleeding into the wood. "No, no, no," she whispered, sinking to her knees. She pressed her hands into the puddle, as if willing it to vanish. This was supposed to be the final night of preparation, not the beginning of a catastrophe. She grabbed a broom and began sweeping the water toward the door, though she knew it was a losing battle. Within minutes, her dress was damp, her hair clinging to her temples, and her heart felt heavier than it had in years. The barn she'd worked so hard to transform into something beautiful, a place where the community could gather, celebrate, and create lasting memories, was now an unholy mess. Hours later, Maggie heard the crunch of gravel under boots and the soft creak of the barn door swinging open. Sophie's voice rang out, calm and steady. "Maggie, we saw the light." Elise followed close behind, a bucket and mop in hand. "We heard what happened. Thought you might need some help." Maggie looked up, blinking away the tears she'd tried so hard to hold back. Sophie and Elise stood before her, sleeves rolled up, their expressions equal parts determination and sympathy. Sophie handed her a towel and Elise started mopping without another word. They worked in silence at first, the three of them shuffling around the barn with rags, buckets, and brooms. The occasional sound of water sloshing into the grass broke the quiet. Soon, other figures began to appear. Neighbors who'd heard the news and couldn't let Maggie face the disaster alone. By midnight, the barn was a hive of activity. Some carried out the ruined rugs and hung them over fences to dry. Others patched the broken pipe. More hands scrubbed, wiped, and wrung out fabric, while a few women rearranged what decorations could be salvaged. Maggie moved among them, directing when asked, but mostly marveling at the sheer force of kindness that had poured in, unbidden, from her small, tight-knit community. When dawn broke, golden light filtered through the barn's windows, illuminating the results of everyone's efforts. The rugs might still have been damp, and a few of the decorations hung slightly askew, but the space had been transformed. The water was gone, replaced by the warm glow of lanterns and the soft scent of pine. As the first guests arrived, Maggie stood at the entrance, her hands clasped together. Couples walked in hand, children laughed as they ran past their parents, and the sound of a fiddle warming up floated in from the corner of the barn. Maggie felt a lump rise in her throat as she took it all in. For a brief moment, she stepped away from the crowd and leaned against the barn door. The weight of the night's chaos and the sleepless hours hit her all at once. But it wasn't despair that settled in her chest. It was gratitude. Sophie approached with 2 glasses of punch, handing one to Maggie. "Looks like we pulled it off," Sophie said, grinning. Maggie took the glass, her eyes scanning the crowd. Laughter echoed across the room as the first dance began. A soft breeze rustled the leaves outside, carrying the scent of hay and lavender. Despite the long night and the chaos that preceded it, the barn now felt alive. "It's more than I ever imagined," Maggie said softly, her voice steady but thick with emotion. Sophie placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's everything you worked for, and it's just the beginning." Maggie smiled, her chest filling with a warm, steady resolve. No matter what had happened the night before, she'd done it. They'd all done it, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt brighter than ever. The barn stood quiet now, the chatter of guests and the lively strains of fiddle music fading into memory. Maggie stepped outside, the warm scent of hay and pine still clinging to her dress. She sank down onto the wide front step, her boots resting on the dirt path below. The sun hovered low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the fields. The sky was streaked with pinks and oranges, a perfect ending to a day she'd dreamed of for so long. Sophie followed, carrying a small tray with 3 glasses of sparkling cider. Elise came after, folding her apron neatly over one arm. They settled beside Maggie on the step, the 3 of them sitting in a comfortable silence as they watched the sky shift to dusk.